Welcome to episode 147 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer Johnny Pham is back from his extended stay in Europe at the Olympics. Johnny, what was the best part? What was the highlight of the Olympics trip real quick before we jump right into it?
I would say being in Roland Garros and just how deathly silent it is in there, and just how excessive Carlos's moaning grunts are that just echo through the stadium. Kayla's like, does he always do this? I was like, I guess I never noticed on live TV. Like when I watch it, I guess I don't notice, but it's very excessively loud there.
Imagine if you're watching like a Alcaraz Nadal doubles match, how loud that would have been.
Yeah, cause it was against Talon Griekspoor. I didn't hear him talk. He didn't say a word, which was insane. She was like, I haven't heard Talon at all. I was like, I don't even think he can talk.
Dalton, I can tell you really want to butt in here.
I just don't have any idea what any of that means.
Yeah.
Johnny went and watched the best tennis player in the world, who's only 21, play at the Olympics. That's really what.
This
is a football podcast. Let's stick to the football, boys.
Okay. Yeah.
Carlos is like the Patrick Mahomes of tennis right now.
But you didn't say he was the best, or is he the best?
He is the best. He's the best player in the world.
He's the best.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And this event venue you were at, what stadium would it be compared to?
Well, Roland Garros is where they play the French Open, which is one of the three biggest tennis venues. So like one of the four biggest. So like one of the four biggest football stadiums. You can take your pick from
like Jerry World. You were at Jerry World?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does it have a retractable roof?
It does have a retractable roof.
No, it was the last one, but it does have a retractable roof. Okay. We've got a good show to get to today, and Johnny is back just in the nick of time because we've got ranks debate coming up. That's always fun. After Johnny gets out of here, Dalton and I are going to just run through some training camp news, some nuggets. There's been a lot that's happened in the last couple of days, especially in the last week since Dalton and I have recorded. And then we're going to just talk about some sophomore quarterbacks because really we were looking up and down the ranks for these debates, and we were like, okay, there's really only two quarterbacks we disagree on. Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud. And we've already had that debate like
multiple times.
We already have like the board bet, so like we didn't want to rehash all that in the debates. We'll talk about it a little bit in the sophomore QBs, but we'll jump right in to the ranks debate here. And before we get started, just to, just lay it out for people who aren't familiar. Dalton and I both did our own individual ranks. We'll link those in the show notes so you can go look at those. But basically, we just picked some, 5 guys that we have differences on. We'll have Johnny read out the average draft position of the guy, my rank, Dalton's rank, Johnny, all that is in the show notes if those are in front of you right now. And then Dalton and I will both go. Johnny will pick a winner. We have 5, so hopefully there's no ties. So we can have a 3-2 or 4-1, or God forbid a 5-0. We've never had. I think 3-2 has been the score every year. Maybe there was a 4. I don't know. I think 3-2 though. It's usually pretty close. I think Johnny has a flair for the dramatics. But all right,
how did we play out last year? We didn't check, did we?
I think I won the debates like at the time 3-2, but the actual debates at the end of the year, like who was right, I think you came ahead 3-2 the opposite way in those, if I remember.
Damn,
correctly.
Johnny does keep it close.
I mean, it was close. It ended up being close, so he was on the money.
Content.
With
Gotta think about the content.
That's true. All right. Speaking of content, we do have this drop from last year. We're just going to recycle because I enjoy it. Shout out to the GOAT, Skip Bayless, no longer at FS1, forever in our hearts, even though he is still alive.
Why would you say something so blasphemous? Something is wrong with you. You better be careful about what the words that's about to come out of your mouth. Don't be disrespectful. You better be careful.
My turn. You told me it was my turn.
You can talk.
Well, because you lose it, you never win it. You've never had it.
Oh, boy.
That stuff is...
Yeah! This man was a bona fide scrub. He can't play. No disrespect whatsoever, but I'm sorry to tell everybody the truth.
Johnny, I was wearing my new Roger Federer ons today. I really thought about just wearing them to the podcast so I could do the Skip Bayless. I can't lose in these shoes before the debate.
Have your wife take the picture of your foot on like
Yep.
the trash?
Yeah, like on like a trash can with this pose. All right, Johnny, lead us off with let's get right into it.
Here we go. The first debate player is Jacoby Myers. He is currently ADP wide receiver 54. Evan has him ranked as wide receiver 40. Dalton has him ranked as wide receiver 62. Let's have Evan go first. Why do you have him so much higher than ADP?
Well, all this guy does, Johnny, is produce, and the fantasy community just hates him anyway. I think it's because he's one of those guys who's good but not great at everything. He's not flashy, he's not explosive, but he just gets the job done. This dude was the wide receiver 28 in fantasy last year, and you can say his situation this year, it's not looking great. But like the Raiders were completely dysfunctional last year. The Patriots, who the year before that, he was on obviously completely dysfunctional. He was also the wide receiver 28 that year. 2021, he was also the wide receiver 33. So like this dude has been a top 36 receiver. This is multiple years in a row. And last time Matt Harmon did his reception perception for Jacoby Myers, he was above the 60th percentile in man, zone, and press, which basically bottom line just means, like I said, good but not great at everything, pretty solid all-around receiver. Now, I know last year, early in the season, Jimmy Garoppolo looked his way a ton early on, and that did wane a little bit down the stretch of the season when Jimmy G was riding the pine. But Jacoby Myers was still wide receiver 35 from week 7 on post Jimmy G last year. So I just think this is a pretty good player on a team where, they've got Brock Bowers, but it's going to be, I think, Devontae number 1, Jacoby number 2, and Brock Bowers number 3 as far as targets. Like Bowers is definitely a guy who, he could have a really good rookie season at tight end, but none of us are ranking him to be anything spectacular. I mean, he's like tight end 13, tight end 12, I think, ADP, and for both of us. So like, I have a hard time believing he's going to be one of the rookie tight ends that really, really, really goes off just because of that situation. So maybe he also has a potential quarterback upgrade if we get Gardner Minshew all season this season. I don't know. We'll see, which is it's sad to say, but this is a good player in a situation where he is going to get targets and he just produces in terrible situations year in, year out. And I'm not even saying he has to be top 30. Like just give my guy top 40 and he's going to be a value. Top 45, he's going to be a value.
Real quick, didn't want to interrupt you. We were doing like time limits, right? I just didn't want to scream time.
We did that in the past. I don't have like a timer to throw up there. We'll just try and
just yell.
Well, yeah, you could do that if you want to time it yourself and then just like scream. Yeah, go for it. Are you in here as like a admin? I think there's an air horn sound in here somewhere.
I think it's pretty fair. Evan did get timed on his first one, and now I'm timed on all of them. That's
no, the world is against you.
All right, Dalton, go ahead.
So Evan and I have the same consensus feeling of Jacoby Myers, which he's good, not great. But my problem with him being good, not great, is that some things have to swing his way for him to have a good season. And to start on that note, it's interesting because it's very clear to me that both Evan and I looked at the same splits, which is I looked all the way up to week 8, which up to week 8, it's Jimmy Garoppolo, but I wasn't as concerned about Jimmy Garoppolo as I was about Josh McDaniels. And I think there's a pretty stark difference in how Jacoby Myers got used when Josh McDaniels left the company and didn't return. So going forward from week 8, Jacoby Myers only saw 1 double-digit target. He saw 5 performances outside of the top 40 wide receivers. And the only thing that kept him afloat as far as his fantasy finish as wide receiver 28 was he ran hot and stayed up with 5 touchdowns. I think Evan and I both agree that touchdowns are fluky year to year, and we're not going to be in the measure of predicting them. So my real concern here was, why wasn't he getting targets? Well, once Antonio Pierce and company took over for this offensive unit, the Raiders ranked 31st in pass rate over expectation in the NFL, second only to our favorite, Arthur Smith, and the Falcons. It's very clear Antonio Pierce's philosophy is to run the ball. It's very clear with their quarterbacks, they're going to want to run the ball, and they're not going to pass that frequently. So the target volume is a concern for Jacoby Myers. He's not a player who's explosive and can win you weeks on 2 catches. He's a player who gets and needs, 6 to 8 targets a game to be effective and efficient. And under the Antonio Pierce regime, he wasn't getting those. So those are my early concerns with Jacoby Myers. And then my final one is I wish that they had some improvement here, but they brought in Luke Getsy from Chicago. And we saw a pedestrian Chicago offense that Luke Getsy ran with worse weapons now that he is in.
You stepped right into my trap card talking about run rate. I have in my notes, here's one Dalton will love. They might be in a situation where they have to throw a lot more than they want to because their over-under is 6.5. They're going to be bad. Those are arguments that Dalton makes every year. So you see, like, these can be crunch arguments. You can make them either way.
But they were bad last year, and they still ran the ball.
Yeah, but think about how unsustainable the end of their season was last year with Zamir White. They ran literally 0 pass plays in the second half against the Chiefs and won the game.
Absolutely, but their pass rate's still going to be bottom of the league. They're going to run the ball as much as they can.
Yeah, but it was like them, the Dolphins, and it may have been just them and the Dolphins were the only 2 offenses in the NFL with their top 2 guys getting it was like 50%, like combining 50% target share. Now Brock Bowers will throw a wrench into that, of course, but again, I'm saying wide receiver 40. He finished wide receiver 28. He was wide receiver 35 the last half of last season. So I'm saying a little downgrade, just not as big as you. It is where our difference is. And unless you have anything else to add, it's probably time for Giants' decision, so we can move on here.
No, I have nothing else to add.
All right, and I think this round will go to Mr. Evan Riggs. Due to the fact of he had great points at the end, he didn't go over time.
Non-existent time.
Did not exist in time, but he did not go over the time and just talked over the moderator here. But that's neither here or there.
I don't know what Trump feels like every debate.
All right, now we have Rashee Rice next. His ADP is wide receiver 38. Evan conveniently has him at wide receiver 38, and Dalton has him at wide receiver 22. Dalton, I will let you go first at a time limit. You may begin.
Yeah. So the Rashee Rice ranking for a lot of people, including Evan at this point, I think is factoring in a decision that he's likely going to be suspended. And so I'll start there because I don't think Evan and I disagree that if he weren't to be suspended at all, he would be the receiver to own in this room. Maybe Evan does, but you just go back and you look at his snap share last year, and this is where I kind of started with it. Even if the guy gets a 4-game suspension, he really didn't come on as a full-time receiver for the Chiefs last year, really until week 14 is the first time he played above an 80% snap share for Kansas City. When he's going to be on the field for the Chiefs, he's going to be a full-time player for Kansas City. He did that in the playoffs repeatedly, had multiple very great performances. Miami hit 130 yards and a touchdown. So just off the bat, I don't think the suspension is going to impact his in-season production that much. We had a player last year, Alvin Kamara, who was suspended for multiple games, and Alvin Kamara came back and had a top 10 running back performance. So I'm hedging my bet on one. We don't even know if the suspension is happening this season, so let me take a good player who's way cheap. And 2, even when he's suspended, I know he's gone for 4 games. Players get injured during the season, you have to deal with it. But I would rather take him ahead of ADP and end up with a guy who, weeks 14, 15, and 16 is there and is going to score a ton of points because he's in a prolific Kansas City offense and who I consider the number 1 weapon for the Kansas City receivers. And that's just going to be a weekly winner. And I've just decided to get over the fact that he may or may not get suspended, but I'm just not going to be in the merit of predicting suspensions at this point.
All right, Evan.
So your price to me is, again, like baking in no possibility of suspension. I'm not saying he's going to be suspended, but I'm not saying he's not going to be because we haven't got that word yet, right? Right. It seems like maybe we're leaning more towards 2025. We've also seen literally with the Chiefs, Willie Gay, like the shoe could just drop kind of at any time. So I think I'm factoring that at least a little bit. into his price. But also, like you talked about getting a guy at a discount, if he's there at wide receiver 38, which is where I have him, I really like the value there. So I'm not disagreeing that. I think Rashee Rice will be very good this year. Part of it is there's just so many receivers, like wide receiver 38, wide receiver 28. There's not that big a difference. So that is part of it here. The difference is probably bigger than it actually is. Like the numbers wise, it looks more different. But all indications are from what we've seen out of Chiefs camp is they want to get back to throwing the ball deep. We've seen the highlights. We've heard the talking points, all of that. And Rashee Rice, to this point in the NFL, has not proven that's in his arsenal. Now, of course, could he take that step forward? Absolutely. But last year in his reception perception sample, over half of his sampled routes were slants and screens. Basically a pure slot guy, which again, that fits well with the two guys they have, who the burners on the outside and Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. But I think I'd just rather take the shot right now on Hollywood Brown, who also a good player in his own right, has not been healthy, for multiple years. So if health is the big concern with him. But last time he was fully healthy for a good stretch of time with a good quarterback, which was the first 6 weeks of 2022, he was the wide receiver 6 in that stretch. Again, not saying that's what he's going to be here, but to me, just the blend of good player and what the Chiefs are looking to do, throw it deep, like he's kind of the guy I'm looking at in this offense. I think Xavier Worthy is going to have a role as well, and he is obviously very talented. And I think we just need to see Rashee Rice earn that volume again this year by expanding his game. And of course, can he do it? He absolutely can. But he's not playing next to Justin Watson. Well, he is, but not like as number one receiver, Justin Watson. He's not playing next to Justin Watson and MVS and Kadarius Toney. And those are the guys that we have to count on if it's not Rashee Rice. So it's just a little bit of a different ball game this year, more competition. So I could see any of these guys out producing their ADP for sure. But with the potential for a suspension, like you said, if he gets suspended 4 games, then, it's fine. He's going to still produce, which that could be true. But if he gets suspended 4 games and he gets hurt, which everybody gets hurt most of the time, like you're going to be kind of fighting an uphill battle. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in this regard.
All right. And I think this one will go to Mr. Dalton. I am also high on Rashee Rice. I think he is how well he learned the playbook in Andy Reid's system last year. And I just feel like a whole offseason, I think he's just going to improve and also be a big factor this year as well. So this next one, are we doing both of these players at once? Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of impossible to talk about one without the other.
Okay, cool. So next player here is Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard. Their ADP for Brooks is RB31. Chuba is RB44. Evan has Brooks at 41. And Hubbard at 36. Dalton has Brooks at RB23 and Hubbard at RB53.
Dalton, you can't laugh at how he says Chuba because that is also how you say Chuba.
I know, that's why I'm laughing.
and Dalton, let's hear about your thoughts about Chuba and Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, so Chuba Hubbard, I have a couple of things I want to start off with him and why I'm skeptical to never drafting him. I think he is a critical piece of fantasy that a lot of people get stuck in, which is fantasy fool's gold. He's a player who I know is going to start off the season being very involved in that offense because Jonathan Brooks is not going to be involved in that offense. What happens to teams that do that is you get stuck with a roster anchor on the second half of your season where those players are non-factors because they lose out to more talented backs. We see this year over year with a ton of incumbent running backs who lose their positions to the rookie that was drafted to eventually be their heir apparent. On Chuba, he's not a very good player. He's a middle of the road fantasy player, and that's always somebody who's incumbent on losing their position. Jonathan Brooks is somebody who the talent is clearly there, and I know this would be a way different argument for Evan and I if he didn't have the ACL tear. So I'm going to briefly touch on that. We've had multiple running backs return from an ACL tear quicker than we thought. We had Breece Hall return to form off of an ACL tear last year on a timeline that is similar to what we're seeing with Jonathan Brooks. The ACL surgeries have gotten better year over year. This is a player who's in the 88th percentile of this running back class. It would have been the best in the last 2 years, only beat out by Bijan Robinson. He's incredibly talented. In fact, he ran for 5,000 yards his last year of high school, which I saw today, which is just an insane statistic. But with all of that combined, I'm going to rank the guy who wins you championships, which is the guy who's playing during your championship season, which is Jonathan Brooks, significantly higher than Chuba. And more importantly, like, I'm very high on this Panthers offense, and I want the players that this regime is picking, and they picked Jonathan Brooks in the second round. And so with all of that combined with their offensive line, I think he has to be ranked like he's going to be an RB2, because I think going into December, he has top 12 RB upside.
Okay. Well, I was fully prepared to move Brooks into my 20s of my ranks if he were going to play week 1. And if he does play week 1, then perhaps that'll change. But right now, what they're saying is it'll be great if he's back in week 3 or 4. And it sounds like there's a very real chance he starts up on the PUP, which means he has to miss the first 4 weeks, which means week 5 would be the earliest that we see him. So all of that is in the air, and I think has to deflate his value right now. So that's number 1. And number 2, you said we've talked a lot about running backs coming off of ACLs. You mentioned Breece Hall returning to good form. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. He finished as the RB, whatever, like 3 or 4, but he had an insane last 3 weeks of volume and production to match. He was a low, like getting 10 carries in some games earlier in the season. All of his underlying stats were not as good as his rookie year, like forced missed tackles, all of the elusiveness stuff. So I don't think Breece was the same guy last year. Javonte Williams, he was the RB30 last year, following up an RB17 season the year before the ACL tear. And the difference between those guys and Jonathan Brooks is, while I like him as a college prospect, we've never seen him play in the NFL. He is unproven as an NFL running back. So maybe he can hit the ground running and be awesome, but we see a lot of rookies go through growing pains that we don't expect, and it takes them longer to get on the field. And not only that, but they seem like they are very willing to take their time, which just makes me worried about how much time he may miss earlier in the season. I think the exact quote, I have it here from their coach, is basically, he has a long career ahead of him. He's someone we think really highly of. We want to make sure we're really smart with this one. And I went back and looked at the last 5 years to see what the least amount of games was for a running back played that finished as a top 24 running back in half-point scoring. Short answer is Achane last year with 11. We all agree that Achane was like a crazy, insane outlier year. He was the RB23 last year in 11 games. Kyron Williams did it in 12, and not to list all these guys, but and actually Chris Carson, funny enough, 11 games in 2020. He was a top 24 back. But bottom line is there's only a couple guys every year who play 13, 12, 14 games and finish as a top 24 back. And you're already behind the 8 ball when you're missing potentially the first couple games as far as that goes. And again, like, guys get hurt. Running backs get hurt. They miss an average of 3.3 games a year going back to 2000. That's per Mass Live, a study they did on the top 24 running backs in ADP each of those years. So that's all the Jonathan Brooks stuff. Like with Chuba, it is really just, again, he is just a guy. He is a jag for sure, but he can help you rack up wins early in the year. And I don't think he'll be a roster anchor. I think he'll be one of those guys where it's like, yeah, he's a handcuff you want down the stretch if he loses his job, which, again, like, we're ranking guys like Ezekiel Elliott in the mid-30s. I don't think there's really any difference in how good the guy is right now. Maybe situation, of course, but like, I don't know. To me, I think the Jonathan, like, I can understand the Chuba rank being low. I can't quite get behind the Jonathan Brooks rank being what it is for you right now.
Yeah,
All
I think
right.
the only thing I'll say on that, just because I do think it's good information, and I'm stealing this from David Klug, who I'm not a big fan of. Todd Gurley tore his ACL on November 15th, 2014.
I saw this exact same tweet.
And his ramp-up schedule...
Go ahead.
His ramp-up schedule was very similar to what we're hearing about Brooks, which is he didn't play the first 2 weeks, and then the third week, he played 7 snaps, and then 21 touches, and then so on and so forth.
Todd Gurley, I think, was also a different tier of
yes, and I'm not comparing the two.
And also Todd Gurley's NFL career lasted like 5 seconds after he was really good because his knee exploded. So perhaps might want to be careful with this one, Panthers.
Well, you can't guess injury history like that. I mean, you're
can't,
one
but-
of the prime. You can't guess injury.
You can't, but I'm saying you might want to treat this with caution, and that's the messaging that the head coach is putting out there as of August 3rd. That's when this quote is from. Okay.
All right, yeah. I feel like Dalton failed to mention the potential PUP list, and that is just the missing 4 games is huge. I mean,
Again,
Evan
it's not official. He could still avoid it, but it is discussed as possible. Right
lingering, yeah. So I think Evan wins this one. And then I'm sure this next player there will be quite the contentious around. It's gonna be Derrick Henry. His ADP is RB9. Evan has him as RB9, and Dalton has him as RB5. So let's have Evan go first.
Real quick before I start, it's funny that Dalton and I are on these sides of this debate after we had this drop made for Dalton a couple years
When
ago.
Derrick Henry's outside of the top 20, I want you each to rue this day.
Yeah, we'll clip this. We'll clip this whole thing. We'll make it into a whole video. It'll be great. That's why I was like, this is gonna get contentious. I was like,
We-
RB5.
Smart
No, it's
people
Evan's
change
turn.
their
It's
opinions.
Evan's turn. Evan.
Mute me then.
So Derrick Henry, he's stepping into a situation in Baltimore that many people have dreamed about for the past few seasons, ever since Tennessee has just kind of gone to complete crap offensively. But this Ravens situation, I think once you actually dig into it, it's not quite as good as it would have been if Henry went there, say, last year or the year before, because the Ravens lost 3 offensive line starters and are consistently being forecasted as a bottom 10 offensive line by all the people who are O-line experts, which I do not pretend to be. And also you have Ronnie Staley, who all the smart people say he is not the same guy he was 2, 3, 4 years ago after the injuries. You know, Ross Tucker recently mentioned them as an O-line he's very concerned about. PFF, which Dalton cites PFF's O-line rankings pretty frequently, they have the Ravens at 25th entering this season. Now, he's coming from the Titans, who they may have had the worst offensive line last season in the NFL, but it's possible he's not stepping into a massive upgrade in that regard. Now, will there be more touchdown equity potential? Sure, of course, which is why he's, the RB9, and he's going very high in drafts. And I think he has the upside to be the RB4, RB5. I just think Dalton's rank is kind of best case, and I don't like ranking guys at best case. Of course, you have to do that with like the RB1 too, but outside of that, I don't like doing that. And then you look back at last season, Baltimore only passed on 40% of their plays in the red zone last year, which was the lowest or second lowest in the NFL. I don't have that off the top of my head, but Todd Monken's career average as a coordinator before that was 58%. So it's like, is that how he wants to run the offense in Baltimore? And maybe it is. Is that because Mark Andrews missed a lot of time last year and Rashad Bateman missed a lot of time, which, he could do that anytime. And Zay Flowers was a rookie and just didn't quite, red zone, you have to be really on your shit. You got to be really precise with your route running and the execution. And maybe that just was not there in the passing game. Baltimore scored 49% of its touchdowns on passing. That was bottom 5 in the NFL. And that's because I know, Gus Edwards had 13 rushing touchdowns last year. It's very easy to say Derrick Henry, oh, there's 13. And maybe that is how it'll work. And there's definitely that upside. But I do think there is some concern with the O-line. There's some concern that maybe there's more passing touchdowns. Maybe there's just more deep shots to Zay Flowers. He was in a kind of not a Rashee Rice role, but not too dissimilar. But unlike Rashee Rice, Zay Flowers proved he can win in reception perception against man, press, and end zone down the field, which Rice did not do as much. When he was 85th percentile against zone coverage last season, or I'm sorry, 90th percentile against zone coverage. For like comparison's sake, Puka Nacua was right in that same range. So like he was very good against zone coverage last year. Derrick Henry is never too much of a factor in the passing game. He probably won't be a huge factor there. Yes, Lamar Jackson will be with him. That will be difficult to deal with, even with a bad O-line. But I mean, this guy is entering his age 30 season. He has the second most touches in the NFL, only to Zeke. I'm not projecting the complete fall off, but the RB9 is at least like getting a little bit of that risk kind of baked into that price. And I'm trying to bake in all of the risk, but also the upside of it could be great in Baltimore this year. And that's the argument, I think, for Henry at 9.
Yeah. So to start it off, I think this is one of those things that I just don't want to overthink it too much. Last year, Derrick Henry was RB8 on the 31st ranked run blocking unit in Tennessee. So the offensive line can't get worse. This offense was also bottom fourth of the league in Tennessee for Derrick Henry, and he managed to have an RB8 performance on that. So I'm baking into expectations that the Baltimore situation is going to be worlds better for him, no matter how that shakes out, whether it's touchdown equity, whether it's improved offensive line blocking, whether it's just the fact that he's on the field more because Will Levis isn't getting sacked and it's 3rd and 19 every other play. So that's where I start with it. And then to go from there, if you just look at what the running back room did last year in Baltimore, it's really hard not to expect that somebody else could do a lot better. They weren't great in rush yards over expectation. Despite that, like Evan mentioned, they had a very high run rate in the red zone. And I think that's just the way this Baltimore offense is going to function. That I understand the injuries to Mark Andrews probably tilts that in a bit, but I don't think anybody in their right mind wants to give 13 goal line carries to Gus Edwards to result in touchdowns. And I'm not going to give him huge touchdown equity, but I'm baking in a projection here that there's potential that Derrick Henry becomes a real goal line dog for them in an offense that's still going to put up points. They were very successful in it last year, and he gets 20, 30 red zone carries in the season, and he saying where he is the leading touchdown scorer in the NFL. His underlying metrics last season really don't show much of a fall off when you talk about the overall offensive line environment. He took a tick in yards after contact. He took a tick in yards before contact as well. And then he wasn't as explosive on his big runs. So there are definitely some concerns with his age, but he didn't go from 0 to 0 last year. And his RB8 performance shows that. And now that he's in an offense with Lamar Jackson, he has zero competition for snaps here. Their depth chart behind him, I think he's going to be a real close to 80% to 90% workload. And I'm ranking him with all of my other big dogs who are going to eat with their offenses, who are going to play 80% of the snaps. And the big dog gets to eat. We wanted this for years, and I'm going to rank it like we wanted it, and we're going to get it.
Wow. And, I think that's going to go to Dalton. I love this argument of how bad Tennessee was and, terrible run grade blocking, and can't be that much worse in Baltimore, but I'm hopeful for it. I think he'll end up being at the end of the year right between you guys.
Evan, we're 2-2 here. It's almost like Johnny is voting
That's
based on the
crazy.
not on the argument.
That is blasphemy. But I have 4 minutes, and next is Jalen Waddle. We have him at ADP wide receiver 17. Evan has him ranked as wide receiver 23, and Dalton has him ranked as wide receiver 18. Dalton, you're up.
Awesome. It's funny here because Evan and I are both going to debate Jalen Waddle, but we're both behind ADP on him in some sense of the matter. And so what my ranking for Jalen Waddle goes is, and we both agree on this, there's like a wide receiver 3 tier where wide receiver is just really flat for probably 20 picks, where I think you could make a case for any of those guys to be switched back and forth. So the reason Waddle's a little higher in that tier for me is because I'm betting on margins of outcomes. I'm just betting simply here that Jalen Waddle is one of those players that has had explosive fantasy performances, and you want to be on the better end of those explosive fantasy performances. Last year was a very down year for Jalen Waddle. Per fantasy points, he was the 5th worst wide receiver in expected fantasy points. He ran really, really cold on touchdown equity. Famously, I kept saying last year, he has to hit this week and get a touchdown, and he just did not. But this is a Miami team that is very explosive and puts up a lot of points, and it's a team that doesn't have anybody I'm really worried about trying to fight for snaps outside of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And I know they're going to pass the ball, and I know they're going to start the NFL season with some funky stuff no one's ever seen before. That's going to lead to some really high-end performances for Jalen Waddle. And he, going back to his rookie season, a season where I didn't like Jalen Waddle, he broke the rookie reception record. He is definitely talented enough that he needs to be ranked within the top 20 receivers, in my opinion. And there's always that outlying option where if Tyreek Hill finally starts to take a step back, he's entering his age 30 season, that Jalen Waddle suddenly gets more snaps and more of those opportune moments, that he can be a more explosive player. And he's one of the few players that's ranked outside of some of the better wide receivers that could finish in the top 12 because of how explosive that Miami offense can be for the first 2 months of the season.
Well, Tyreek Hill's got ranked number 1 player in the NFL, so I don't think he's too close to taking a step back. I feel like, you can say, see, this is the problem, is you can say about a lot of guys in that range that they should be top 20 because like Devontae Smith should be top 20. DK Metcalf should be top 20. Like, I don't have the list in front of me. Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, like all of these guys like should be top 20. Not all of them are top 20 because there's just a lot of guys in that range. But it is funny to
top 20. No.
Yeah, well, you have Waddle ahead of DK Metcalf, who I know you don't have top 20. Cooper Kupp, who I looked, you have 21st. Stephon Diggs, I think you did have top 20. It's funny to be on this side of the Waddle debate because I've been more pro Waddle than you the last couple of years, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. Number one is Matt Harmon's pointed this out a lot lately that Waddle actually plays the more difficult outside X receiver position in this offense. Tyreek Hill gets a lot of the stuff designed for him, which, like, yeah, you want to get Tyreek Hill the ball any way you can, which obviously Waddle, it can still be really good in that role, although he finished behind Jacoby Myers in fantasy points last season. Just want to throw that out there. But Waddle was like close to 80% of his sampled routes the last 2 seasons since Tyreek Hill has been there as the X. So he's just gotten a lot more of those looks, and those looks require, you get less high, you get more low percentage throws, and you have to rely on Tua to be willing to fit in there, which when his first read is already Tyreek Hill on a lot of plays, that gets a little dicey. So that's just a little point against him. And again, this is the case for a lot of these guys in this range for the number 1 receivers, like Devontae Smith has A.J. Brown, Cooper Kupp has Puka Nacua, although that is debatable. We talked about that last week. But Tyreek Hill just so stupidly good that he's going to limit Waddle's upside. And he talked about the touchdown stuff. That is, of course, like partially fluky. You can't predict that stuff. But also you look at end zone targets last year. It was Tyreek Hill 37%, Jalen Waddle 14%. And I look at guys that I have ahead of Waddle and you don't, and Devonta Smith and DK Metcalf, who were at 31 and 40% respectively of end zone targets. And I look at air yards where Waddle was at 25%, Devonta Smith 33%, DK Metcalf 37%. They just have a little bit more of a floor and a pretty similar ceiling. And I mean, DK, he's the number 1 on his team with a declining Tyler Lockett and JSN, who we like, but like, is he as good as, like, obviously no, he's not in this class right now. So, and I think also mentally I am dinging Waddle, not Tyreek Hill, but Waddle a little bit for Tua's fantasy points going down as the year goes on, which, you talked about with Brooks. You want your guy to be at his best at the end of the season. Well, Tua's fantasy points per game, 22, 19, 17, 14 in December, and 10 points per game in January. So I just, that's like a tiebreaker, that and just the air yard stuff between him and some of those other guys in that range for me.
Wow. And
Jacoby Myers over Jalen Waddle, you coward. No.
That's a good point. And
I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think this debate rank will be going to Evan Riggs. I think that the Jalen Waddle having a target rate of 14% is wildly low.
In the end zone, yes.
The fact, in the end zone, and the fact that Tua's first read is always going to be Tyreek, no matter what. Like, that's just natural since he's the number 1 player in the NFL, supposedly. Mm-hmm. And that's just going to be a natural thing to Jalen Waddle. So, congrats to Evan. We'll see how this pans out at the end of the season.
Thank you. Were you keeping track of these in a doc by chance while we were doing this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll want to look back on this and actually recount at the end. All right. If you got to get out of here, Johnny, thanks for sticking around, being the judge. And Dalton, it was a pleasure. And I'll just take my victory in grace, not say much more than that.
Hey, we saw where the cards fell last year. I came out on top. We got a whole season for the cards to fall again. And week 1, I'm doing victory laps.
So I was kind of rushing through some of the stuff to make sure we got Johnny out of here. There was a board bet. I want to revisit the Derrick Henry real quick. You know, you have him at 5, I have him at 9. Josh Jacobs was another guy we could have debated, but we've done that debate a million times, like I think every year of the show.
Actually.
So we didn't do it, not on this show, but just in general, we've done the Josh Jacobs thing. But let's just do a straight up Josh Jacobs versus Derrick Henry this year. I feel like that makes sense for where, I mean, you have Jacobs 11, I have Henry 9, you have Henry 5, I have Jacobs 6. So like we're right there with both those guys.
I'll do that, but I do want to point out I'm still above ADP on Josh Jacobs.
Okay, maybe above ADP, but you're not anywhere close to me. So
you're just insane on ADP.
Typing.
Hey, I saw today in practice, AJ Dillon they ran 2 running backs. AJ Dillon took a slant route to the house. So you should be worried about Josh Jacobs.
That is our bell on the rankings debate. All right, like I said at the beginning, we've got just a couple other quick things to get to before we hop out of here. We'll start with training camp storylines and then get out of here with some sophomore QB discussion. And I mean, there's just been a lot, Dalton, that has happened. And what has not happened is the Brandon Ayuk trade that I swear we're getting like updates that are really not updates, but sort of updates like 2 or 3 times a day from all the insiders. Long story short, I think the most likely destination seems to be the Steelers. I mean, Insider Supreme Pretty Ricky has the Steelers as his place. I mean, we've heard the Browns. From what I've seen, if he wanted to be a Patriot, he would be a Patriot. Talking about Ayuk, because he does have some leverage in picking his team because he has to sign a contract with that team. I think I saw the Patriots are offering the most money, but he doesn't want to play there, which, I mean, of course, that makes sense. You don't want to go from a Super Bowl contender to probably the worst team in the AFC, I think. So I like, no trade has happened yet, but just any thoughts on if a trade does happen or like where you want to see Ayuk go? Just, I mean, anything. We don't have to talk about it too much because we can talk about it more once it actually does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of slightly adjust my rankings coming into the show based on it because I trust renowned NFL insider Pretty Ricky. And I moved Debo up. I didn't move Ayuk down yet. I think I moved him down 1 spot, but that was a different rank that just dropped him 1 spot. Mm-hmm. I do think this moves Ayuk into that flat tier you and I were talking about earlier, where they're all really good players, but there's a hiccup kind of stopping you from ranking them higher. He would be at the front end of that because he's such a good player. But it is Arthur Smith, it is Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, and it is the Steelers. All of those are major downgrades from San Francisco. This, for me, I have George Kittle 5 right now above Kyle Pitts after our discussion on that topic a couple weeks ago. I would probably move George Kittle up to maybe tight end 3. Like, he was supremely efficient last year on just 90 targets. And then I would definitely put Debo probably gets close to top 10, to be completely honest with you. Yeah. Ricky Pearsall becomes like a mid-40s pick. And Juwan
if he can stop getting hurt, he's gotten hurt like 3 times already.
And then Juwan Jennings becomes a late-round flyer based on how Kyle Shanahan is. It would also probably – I think Brock Purdy's QB 11 for me. I think Brock Purdy would fall below Matthew Stafford into like QB 13 or 14 range. And then on the Steelers side, if this happens and George Pickens is still a Steeler – we already are below ADP on him at wide receiver 36.
Yeah.
I might put him at wide receiver 40. I honestly can't go much lower because I know he's going to have explosive games no matter what. But I do think, like, fantasy wise, there's going to be a level of consistency you're not going to get from George Pickens in an Arthur Smith offense that's already been clear about running the ball as much as they can.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add as far as all of the ranking stuff goes, other than I do think I haven't moved Ayuk at all just because I don't know what's going to happen. He could still go back to San Francisco for all I know. With that said, it kind of like this has been unlike really any trade kind of rumor negotiation that I've really seen in the NFL. Usually what happens, you like think back to the Chiefs with Tyreek Hill. It got leaked that, he's requested a trade. They're letting him negotiate with other teams. And then in an hour, he was gone. It's not always that quick, but like it can be. And it's usually a lot quicker than what we're seeing right now, which we have seen the Ayuk has requested the trade. He is able to negotiate contract with other teams, and we're just kind of still lingering right now. But I haven't moved him yet. If he does get traded, I'll have to move him down because I can't imagine, like, unless he got traded to the Bills or like, I mean, even the Lions.
Cowboys.
Like Bills, Lions, Cowboys, like, all of the, like, unless he gets traded to a really good team, I can't see the situation not being worse than what it is right now. And if it is Steelers or the Browns, or if it circles back to the Patriots, significantly worse than what he's in right now. So, just hoping he ends up in at least a decent situation, because of course we love the player. And just real quick before we move off of San Fran, we got the news that CMC will not play in the preseason due to a calf injury. I don't think it's anything actionable right now. Obviously, like, it's a calf strain. There's a lot of different, there's been a 1, 2, 3, 4 on the severity. It's like a high ankle sprain, which we'll talk about a high ankle sprain in a little bit. But there's different levels of severity. I look back more at like basketball than football because I feel like it happens more, and I'm just more like Kevin Durant just missed a month leading up to the Olympics with a calf strain. He missed a similar amount of time a couple years ago for the Warriors back in the day with a calf strain. So like maybe he's out a month, he's fine week 1, something to watch. And of course, Elijah Mitchell is banged up behind him. So like, yeah, like the one time we need Elijah Mitchell, he is hurt. What a surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, all I really care about here is, I mean, Christian McCaffrey doesn't have to play in the preseason. He's a vet. Probably overly precautionary, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
No changes to me having him as running back 1.
Although I have him at 2. I moved Breece Hall officially.
But yeah, I think they're just being overly cautious with him, and there's no reason to be anything but.
Yep. Okay, Rashad Bateman, he apparently landed on the football after making a great catch in the end zone after a great day at camp where he was the best player, which he has been many times. The drum beat for Bateman is quite loud. Sounds like the injury is nothing serious. It's just like I'm kind of living and dying because he has gotten hurt. I think he's left practice early twice, maybe 3 times in the last, since training camp has started, but he's been really good when he's been out there. And the Ravens and the beat reporters and the team, like John Harbaugh, everybody is pumping this guy up. And the Ravens seem really, really invested in giving him one last chance to be in that 1-2 punch with Zay Flowers as a legit receiver. So not really too much actionable here. He's going to return soon, it seems like, but just something to keep an eye on because he is at least an interesting late round guy. Like I have him at wide receiver 60. I think you're pretty similar, not getting carried away with him, but he has potential to move up if he actually is healthy. When I'm drafting in 3 weeks, I might bump him up 5-10 spots.
Yeah. All I'll say is if he landed on the football, it means he dropped the football in the end zone.
No, he caught it. It's just like the way he landed direct. I think he probably like caught it here and like landed like he was like holding his ribs or chest, they said, when it was walking off.
But this is so par for the course for him. For me, it's gonna be like I have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
It's just so hard at this point. And right now I'm getting like shades of Chiefs talking up Kadarius Toney last offseason for all of us to be like, oh my God, they were lying. He is terrible.
Yeah, the difference between Bateman and Toney is that while Toney is like just a talented guy, a talented athlete, I know I sent you Matt Harmon's reception perception. Like his reception, like all of the film people are still like, yeah, Bateman was kicking ass last year. Like there's apparently, I haven't seen this, but I heard someone say this on a podcast. I have to find it. There is an entire highlight reel of Rashad Bateman from last year that's dedicated to just him beating his guy in coverage and not getting the ball. Like he himself was good. It's just the stats were not because he wasn't getting the ball when he was actually on the field last year. So that's the difference between him and Toney. But injury-wise, yes, it is not dissimilar at all.
It's so annoying. Hopefully he's good and healthy this year.
Yeah. All right. To Cincinnati, where Chase Brown, the drumbeat, has been really, really strong for him all camp. Zach Moss, a little bit of a resurgence today. He caught 3 passes inside the 10-yard line. Dalton caught a touchdown. Are you taking the cheese at all on the Chase Brown stuff? I think to answer my own question before I let you, I think we both moved him up in our ranks and Moss down in our ranks a little bit, but you still have Moss ahead of Brown right now, and I think I do too. So, like, I think we're both kind of throwing our hands up in the air and saying, let's see what happens week 1. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I had Moss at 28 and Brown at 50 before my rankings update, and I put Moss down to 32 and Brown up to 36 because my initial take was this was a 70-30 backfield split in favor of Moss. It really starting to feel like it might be a 50-50 split, and that it's one of those things where the better player on real turf playing real teams is going to come out on top in these scenarios. I'm still partial to Zach Moss. That's why I have him ranked above it. Again, Chase Brown didn't play any pass protection last year, and a lot of his skill set is catching passes. So you really have a double entendre there where you can't put him on the field to pass protect. You have to throw him the ball.
And the thing is, like, he is a very talented player. The issue with him, though, is that just like the vision last year wasn't really there. And so they had to run like very specific run plays for him. And Zach Moss was really good out of the shotgun. Like, I think we would both agree that Chase Brown is the more talented player, just like a talented athlete, talented football player than Zach Moss. But the problem is, like, does Chase Brown do the stuff that gets him on the field more than Zach Moss? And I just don't know if that's true yet. And Chase Brown kind of has to prove that to me because, he had some nice flashes down the stretch last year. He's a very explosive player, but those were games that meant nothing for the Bengals. Like, there were no stakes in any of those games. Let's see how much he's trusted in certain situations when the stakes are real, when Joe Burrow's back there at quarterback, like when they're playing for a chance to make the playoffs, win the division, win the Super Bowl, whatever. Like, let's see it. And could Chase Brown have improved enough to where he's earned the trust in some of those situations? Of course he could, but we just like it was far enough away last year that I think we just have to see it before we put Chase Brown above Zach Moss, while we also kind of acknowledge that, yes, if things click for him, the upside is definitely higher.
Yeah, and no offense to Chase Brown, but this team just needs a positive chain mover. They have enough weapons elsewhere that they don't need a guy to play hero ball in their backfield. And if he can't do the simple, smart, hit the hole and get 4 yards when they need it, like, he's just going to lose time to Zach Moss, who will do those things. And that's part of what this comes down to be. And part of me can't get out of my head that he's just like another DeAndre Swift, that he's going to have highlight reel plays, but he's going to have bonehead plays. I don't want to invest in that player.
The fantasy finishes might be better than the ride indicates for this type of player. That's definitely a good call. Are you buying at all the drumbeat for Jalen Tolbert? Saw on The Athletic yesterday that the Cowboys, that he is clearly the second receiver right now. Like, are you buying the potential for him to steal the job from Brandon Cooks? And if he does, like, should we care about Jalen Tolbert for fantasy at all?
I mean, this guy's had 2 seasons in the NFL and been a real zero, which is always a concern. Like, we're kind of past this year 3 breakout metric that used to be popular like 10 years ago. I'm not like, some of these camp reports, you have to remember it's just the team. So is it very easy for Jalen Tolbert to look good against a whole bunch of zeros and CeeDee Lamb? Absolutely.
And I was listening to, I think it was Nate Tice. I don't know if you listened to his top 10 offenses pod. I think he literally said there are guys in that receiver room that he has never heard of. Nate Tice, like one of the preeminent NFL experts right now.
Yeah.
He is never, like, their receiver room is down very bad right now.
They have, by the way, there's a Jonathan Brooks in their receiver room who's getting hype, and he is an
Does he spell his
free
name
agent.
correctly? Jonathan Brooks for the Panthers. Google Docs auto-corrected the O to an A like 4 times on me the other day.
And it the other way.
Well, Jonathan, like, that's why he's running back 41 for me. He's got to get that name changed before he moves up my ranks.
Come draft season, don't confuse the two for anybody.
Seriously.
But it's just that receiving room is just so absolutely terrible that people are going to get like hype around it. But once these players are put up against NFL corners, they're going to be terrible. The equation here is a little bit of Schultz, like 9-10 targets a game and 20 targets to CeeDee Lamb. Like, that's going to be the equation in Dallas. And then Brandon Cooks, for what it's worth, he is going to be better than Jalen Tolbert unless he gets injured. I know he wasn't great last year. Jalen Tolbert's just not great. And part of a beat reporter's job is to make the front office look good. And let me tell you right now, this front office didn't do anything all off season. They have to write storylines about somebody, and Jalen Tolbert got to be a somebody for a little while.
Well, what I would say is because of their receiver room, whether he beats out Cooks or not to start off the season, he is going to get a chance most likely. Like, he'll be out there. So if you see him week 1, you're like, wow, I like how this guy looks. Pick him up off waivers. I don't really want to draft him, but I think he's kind of a guy where it's like, okay, let me see how it looks. This might be like a waiver wire guy, like make a top 5, top 10 waiver wire list after week 1 sort of deal.
Yeah, and that's probably the best advice is just see what they do. And then just don't become beholden to them.
Yeah, seriously. All right, Puka Nacua suffered a knee injury in practice that Sean McVay has said is minor, and he expects him to be good to go for week 1. Just worth noting because obviously Puka Nacua, top 8 receiver right now. We just talked about last week how we thought maybe we were underrating Cooper Kupp, so maybe this adds helium to Cooper Kupp. I don't know. We'll see kind of what the prognosis is as we get closer to the season. But just keep your eye on Puka Nacua. Sean McVay, if you don't follow Coach Speak on Twitter, you should. Sean McVay has actually been like the most honest coach in the NFL when it's come to injuries per how this guy measures it. So you can actually listen to Sean. Yeah, seriously. Well, he's honest with injuries about running backs, just not who's going to play at running back sometimes. But yeah, so you could listen to what Sean McVay says about injuries and maybe not take it to the bank, but feel better about it than you do from other coaches. So just keep an eye on what they say about Puka over the next couple of weeks before you draft.
Yeah, and it was I think a Bursar sack or something that he landed on. I saw like they clarified today. For what it's worth, like if anything, it kind of ruins the cheap Cooper Kupp we were getting, which kind of sucks.
Yeah,
because he was incredibly cheap where he was going at basically around 4. It doesn't really scare me too much off of Puka Nacua. It is notable though, if you go back to his collegiate career, BYU, who obviously misutilized him, said one of the reasons that they had him run the routes he did was because of all his lower body injuries. Yeah. So he is a guy with a history of lower body injuries. I would be a little concerned if I draft him in week 1, he has like a 50% snap share, then like a lot of alarm bells go off, but it's probably not going to, I might move Garrett Wilson above him in rankings, but he's not really going to fall into my top 10 wide receivers.
Yep. Okay. Josh Downs went down today, high ankle sprain. There's not a definitive timeline that's really been put out by the team. I've seen some beat reporters are speculating, 4 to 6 weeks. That's kind of might be pushing it for week 1. We'll see if he misses time. Obviously, I think Downs has to fall in ranks a little bit. And if Downs were to miss time, I do think that would be a little bit of a ding for Anthony Richardson because that is one of the easy buttons in this offense, him and Michael Pittman in the passing game. So obviously a bummer all around. Sounds like it was a dumb training camp play where a guy was tackling when he should not have been tackling. And hopefully Josh Downs is back and good to go sooner rather than later because, we talked about earlier today off air, but, high ankle sprains, they can sometimes linger, but he does at least have a month where he can, have some time to heal before the season. Maybe he misses 2-3 games and he kind of turns into a guy that you can take with your last pick. Maybe he's a waiver guy, depending on your league. Like he could turn into a value if he drops far enough in draft because this news, if he's back on a pretty quick timeline for the injury.
Yeah, I have 68% Josh Downs and underdog. So that one really did hurt. Thanks, Charles Cross, for that. What I will say is the biggest concern is high ankle sprains, like Evan alluded to, have been like some serious season enders for players in the worst way possible that they play the season. And there's just something wrong. And Jerry Jeudy had this a couple of years ago. Obviously, he has other issues, but Keenan Allen has struggled with this in the past. Like there are a ton of NFL players who I think.
Well, and Saquon, not the torn ACL year, but the other, like he had a high ankle sprain that really plagued him for about 8 weeks that season.
Yeah, and the thing is, they're going to be active, and you're going to want to play them sometimes, and it makes it a lot harder. Evan and I both moved Josh Downs up in our ranks prior to this show, even so. It's definitely a tough hit and definitely a hit to that Colts offense because rookie Anthony Gould came in and took all of the slot snaps. So not exciting, not fun,
Because like Alec Pierce, not really a guy you want to move in there, and then like A.D. Mitchell, don't really want to do that either. Michael Pittman, you can, but also like there's just not a guy who is just a natural throw in the slot type of guy on this offense. That is one of those three guys, I guess I should say.
Yeah, maybe more targets for Jonathan Taylor. News report: Jonathan Taylor's playing out of the slot. Moving
on. All right. Speaking of the Colts, let's just jump right into sophomore quarterback ranks. Like we talked about at the top, we've had this Richardson versus Stroud thing. We didn't want to do a whole nother thing on the show, so we're like, well, let Dalton have the idea. Let's just rank sophomore quarterbacks this year, and we can talk about them all. Yeah, for fantasy, and talk about them all for a few minutes as we get out of here. And we can stay with the Colts, Dalton, and I'm sure your number one has not changed. It is Anthony Richardson, correct?
Yeah, Anthony Richardson is my one. I can give the full list just real quick. CJ Stroud is 2, Bryce Young is 3, Will Levis is a far-flung 4 for me.
So I have CJ Stroud 1, Anthony Richardson 2, Will Levis 3, and Bryce Young 4.
Wow, we have some differences of opinion here.
We just swapped you guys. It's not that.
Yeah. Well, I actually think Will Levis sucks, but
I don't think he's very good. But like the thing with Will Levis, we can start at the bottom here. Why not? The thing with Will Levis is the O-line. Yeah, it is probably going to be questionable again. But
okay, I do just want to point out. I don't know if you saw this. Did you see the Titans starting 25-year-old right guard retired yesterday?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, he just retired. Like, that's pretty bad. It has to be pretty bad.
We don't know the circumstances. They don't like Deontay Johnson, I think, is my favorite receiver between, like, if you just look at the two teams' receivers between Carolina and Tennessee. Sorry, but I think as long as Hopkins is bad, which he's another guy who I didn't even have in the storylines, he's out for like 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury. Well, he's probably going to miss time at the very beginning of the season. As long as he comes back in relatively short order and is, kind of like what he was last year, you have Calvin Ridley, you have Hopkins. I like the running back room with Pollard and Tajay Spears a lot more than right now an uncertain rookie and Chuba Hubbard, who we agree is just a guy. Like, I just like the surrounding cast a little bit more in Tennessee, and think Will Levis is set up better for success. If this were like just real life football ranks, I would still have Bryce Young ahead. And I do think the Panthers can have a nice bounce back season. I think you're a little bit more all in on the Panthers offense than I am, though. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely part of it. So the big differentiator for me, because both Bryce Young and Will Levis had pretty terrible freshman seasons, but Dave Canales has like a pretty extensive history of rehabbing broken quarterbacks, and
with Baker Mayfield being the most recent one last year.
Yes, and then Geno Smith before, and even Russell Wilson. And the argument for Zach Taylor is what they did with Jake Browning last year. I think it's a little different with the weapons you get in Cincinnati, and also doing that for half a season as compared to a body of work. But then, like, at full face value, when I go back and I watch some Bryce Young, his biggest thing was he took a lot of sacks, which Canales has really fixed. The thing when I watch Will Levis is he also takes a lot of sacks.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with Levis is he has all the physical talent, but he's a slow processor and makes bad decisions. And with Bryce Young, it was less that and just more like he had no receivers getting open at all. And he had to make, like, you already have to make tight window throws in the NFL. And so that just was magnified even more. So he had less help and was in one of the worst situations you can be in. But yeah, I just like Levis' situation a little bit more right now.
Yeah, I definitely like Bryce Young. I also think Bryce Young is more talented.
I do too. Unfortunately, fantasy football and quarterback talent sometimes does not go into these ranks. I think Will Levis has neither of these guys. You think it was a rusher? I think I would give Levis the edge as far as like rushing upside over Bryce Young. So that factors in a little bit too. I think what could maybe swing this though is what do we get out of the Panthers young guys at receiver? Like Adam Thielen is still there. Like, can he be anything? But more to the point, like we got a report yesterday, and it was the first one I've seen all summer about Jonathan Mingo, but it was a highlight, which looked pretty good, but it's a highlight, a one-on-one rep. But it was this guy is a completely different guy this year, great route runner, blah, blah, blah. So, like, if Mingo can go from being very bad last year to even just like a solid rotational receiver, that would help a ton. And then Xavier Legette is the rookie that people are excited about, and I'm excited about him too. Like, and if he can be an immediate day one contributor and be better than people expect, better than I expect, then that might tilt the scales a little bit towards Bryce Young.
Yeah, and he already hurt his foot, which you love to see about a fifth-year guy coming out. What I will say about Mingo is he has to be a completely different player because he was of players with 70 targets or more last season. He was the worst per efficiency, and he was the worst by like if I have the graph in front of me, I wish I did. There is a quadrant that is only Jonathan Mingo. He was pretty bad. But no, I think mine is I just believe that even with weaker weapons, Bryce Young can get more done because of better coaching. After we discovered Alex Van Pelt was fired from the Browns.
Fourth straight show that Van Pelt's been brought up. We're going to keep this thing going. And then, we've talked about Stroud, we've talked about Richardson, but just real quick, I figure we can each give our elevator pitch for both guys. Like CJ Stroud was awesome last year. And my kind of process for ranking him is it's like, I kind of think he is younger and not as proven Joe Burrow. So I'm just going to rank him right behind Joe Burrow because I think he's like that tier of player. He is an awesome passer, a great deep ball guy. And you talk about an offense that has weapons. I mean, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, if you get a full healthy season. We both love Nico Collins. You still have Dalton Schultz, who is there at tight end. Joe Mixon is an upgrade over what they had at running back in Devin Singletary. And maybe most importantly, he played behind a pretty injured and pretty bad O-line last year. That O-line actually projects to be pretty good this year. So, yeah, the rushing probably isn't going to be there for Stroud. So that's what keeps him at like the 6-7 range as opposed to cracking that top 4. But he's just such a good player, and he had those big explosion games with just passing the ball that I'm not saying he's going to be Mahomes, but like Mahomes will have games where he doesn't run the ball and he's still, he puts together QB1 stretches where he's top 5 in like 10 straight weeks. And I think Stroud can be just a tier below that with Joe Burrow as far as a passer this season.
Yeah. And so my elevator pitch for Richardson, I wanted to start with practice recap of him. He went 7 for 12 with 2 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and an interception. I think that's going to be par for the course.
Barely over 50%.
And I mean, again, if we're ranking like quarterbacks in the NFL, Stroud's the clear number 1 here.
Yeah.
But par for the course, that's like really, really good fantasy outing, even in a full game slate, because you're already getting 14 points out of him just on touchdowns alone. And that's where I rank it. Last year, the Colts were the fastest team with Gardner Minshew. They ran the most plays. They're going to continue that. That's a very Shane Steichen philosophy. More plays, more possibilities for points, also injuries. And because of that, I want to have as much Richardson as I can because that rushing upside is really what jettisons people into that top 5 and into that top 3 to be the most successful. And my concerns with Stroud, and I've talked about it before, it's just last year, the Houston Texans faced the lowest number of 2 high safety coverages in the NFL, and that has to change with what he did to it. He absolutely torched those. Teams are going to play him more like a premier quarterback and force him to work it. He has the weapons.
I think that's where having Stephon Diggs as kind of the security blanket third down guy will help them a ton.
Yes, but it's going to hit like crack when Anthony Richardson breaks like the QB rushing record. And I just can't get away from him. And like the final thing I'll say on this is my least favorite thing about CJ Stroud is that he's QB4 an underdog. And it really bothers me to the core because there's no way he should be going over guys like Mahomes, but it's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I think I have him at 6. I think in my ranks.
Yeah, you're actually below ADP for underdog,
which is funny because I think if you looked at Fantasy Pros, it might be a little bit different, which is what I was using for our show. By the way, should have mentioned that off the top. My concerns with Richardson, real quick, are just number one, injuries, and you said it. I've always said you can't predict injuries, but my concerns are just more the play style. And not like there are obviously guys, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler, like all these guys running quarterbacks who, yeah, they've all got banged up besides Josh Allen mostly, but it's not like you're running quarterbacks, so you're going to get injured. It's just more that this guy was lowering his shoulder into guys last year. And I think we saw a quote from the Colts that's like, oh, yeah, he's not going to like slide this year either. It's like, okay, cool. So I'm just a little bit worried about the longevity of Richardson this year. He only finished 2 games last year, and I just want him to take better care of himself. And then just like he has to prove himself to me a little bit more as a passer because, yeah, he can run, all that's great, but he's going to have to pass the ball better than last year to consistently keep his team on the field to rack up those rushing numbers. Of course, could he do it? Yeah, like I have him ranked as, like a QB1. So it's not like I'm saying like I'm off him entirely. This is not a Justin Fields like experience here for me.
Look, he played 32% of the snaps against Houston and finished QB 19 on the week. That
yeah, you'd be disappointed if you started him that week.
I mean, there are guys who finished worse. Just saying. No, I mean, there's going to be accuracy concerns, and I already know like week 1 he's going to have a bad throw, and Twitter's going to have a fun day with it. But I don't think, at least for me, the Richardson ranking isn't what I think he's going to do in real football, and I don't think it is for you either.
Yeah, no.
But I think he's going to be one of the most fun rides and one of the most fun watches week to week, barring he does not get injured.
Yeah, that's the key. All right, Dalton, that is going to do it for episode 147 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube Half Point Per Podcast. The link to these things will be in the show notes as always. I'll also try and have Johnny include the link to our ranks so you can look at those throughout the show. The ranks debate portion if you'd like. The show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, of course, on YouTube as well. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back again next week.